Good day. I'm going to start this program with a brief apology. Briefly, I apologize that I'm doing another program on the topic of Alexei Navalny. As many of you rightly say in comments which have appeared on the threads of earlier programs, Navalny does not carry much political weight in Russia. His support is consistently overestimated in the West, and he is getting a disproportionate amount of attention in light of that. That is actually true, but I would add that Western governments have decided, for their own reasons, to give Navalny this huge amount of importance, and that does give or confer upon Navalny a certain degree of importance, which perhaps within Russia itself is unwarranted. The second thing I will say briefly is that I do find the topic of Navalny, not so much because of of his role in Russia, but because of the way in which it plays into international relations and the relations between Russia and the West interesting. So I ask for your indulgence, and I apologize in advance for coming back to this topic. Anyway, the subject of my program today is Amnesty International's very strange decision, first to grant Navalny prisoner of conscience status following the recent court decisions in Moscow, which have sent him to prison for a period of roughly 3 years for breaching previous probation conditions, and then to withdraw it. This has been an odd decision, and I should say straight away that I am far from sure that it won't be reversed again. There's been considerable pushback and some criticism of Amnesty from certain powerful quarters for the fact that it has acted in this way, and Navalny's own team in Russia and elsewhere are understandably furious about it. So I don't think it's impossible that we will see this decision reversed and Navalny found to be a prisoner of conscience again. Having said that, the fact that the decision was made to withdraw Navalny's prisoner of conscience status by Amnesty has had an impact and has caused a great deal of embarrassment and some anger. You can see this, incidentally, by the extent to which the British media has generally avoided discussing this story. There have been very, very few articles and comments about it in the media here in Britain, and I believe that this is also true in the United States. So why has this all happened? Why have we got into a situation where Amnesty first granted Navalny prisoner of conscience status and then withdrew it? Well, I don't think it's difficult to say why he was granted prisoner of conscience status. As far as the West is concerned, Navalny is the leader of the anti-Putin opposition. He is a fighter against corruption. He was the victim of an attempted poisoning by Novichok, and he was somebody who courageously returned to Russia to fight the political battle against the Putin regime there. And as a result, on the strength of what are said to be trumped-up charges, he has been sent to prison again in defiance of a recent decision of the European Court of Human Rights. A person who the Western political establishment and its media class and many people in the West perceive in that sort of way would normally be expected to be granted by Amnesty prisoner of conscience status, and it is entirely unsurprising that Navalny was. Why, however, was this prisoner of conscience status suddenly withdrawn? Well, I'm going to make one guess, and I think there's also one provable fact. The provable fact is that many people within Britain, Amnesty supporters in Britain and I suspect elsewhere, protested and rebelled against this decision and contacted Amnesty and sent to Amnesty proof of the various extraordinary and deeply offensive and outrageous comments that Navalny has in the past made about people of immigrants and people of non-Russian ethnicities. Some of these comments, by the way, are deeply shocking and outrageous, and they would certainly not be accepted and would, in some cases, I suspect, even provoke legal claims if they were made in some countries in the West. However, I would add that over and above these protests that took place in the West amongst Amnesty supporters, I suspect that there has also been a strong pushback from members of Russia's own liberal opposition. Firstly, it needs to be stressed again that this constant refrain one sees in the Western media that Navalny is in some way the leader of the Russian opposition is completely untrue. Other opposition leaders in Russia and other opposition parties in Russia carry far more support than he does. And of course, he has never succeeded in getting his movement represented in the Russian parliament, whereas there are other parties, opposition parties in Russia, like the Communist Party, the Liberal Democratic Party, the Fair Russia Party, which have. More to the point, however, Navalny is not even entirely supported within Russia's own non-system, as the Russians call it, liberal opposition. People like Grigory Yavlinsky and his Yabloko party are staunchly opposed to him, and those Russian liberals who perceive themselves as being more on the left of the political spectrum strongly disagree with Navalny's views and politics and find them offensive. I would add that other Russian liberal oppositionists, some of whom might be more sympathetic to Navalny on ideological grounds, also find him an abrasive personality and someone who is extremely difficult to work with. So all of these people collectively would have resented this attempt to set up Navalny as some sort of leader of their opposition movement. And I can easily imagine and believe that many of them will have quietly made known to Amnesty, which, by the way, has a presence in Russia, their strong disagreement with this decision to grant him prisoner of conscience status. However, there is nonetheless a puzzle about this because, of course, Navalny's comments, his extraordinary xenophobic comments, I'm using euphemistic language here, are well known. Anybody who does any kind of even cursory internet search about him would quickly find out details, and if they probed far enough and took the seemingly obvious step of checking out on the Russian internet, the Runet, they would have found further details, including videos, which are actually show even more starkly the sort of opinions that Navalny once expressed. It beggars belief for me. I find it unbelievable that Amnesty, when it granted Navalny prisoner of conscience status, was unaware of this. Clearly, I mean, I can only assume that they decided to grant him that prisoner of conscience status as part of the general feeling in the West of opposition to Russia at this time. and decided to disregard the fact that Navalny had had this previous history of making these sort of comments. It must follow from that that Amnesty seriously underestimated the reaction of its own supporters and, as I suspect, the reaction of the liberal opposition in Russia itself to this decision. That presumably is why this decision has been reversed. And even if it is now reversed again and Navalny's prisoner of conscience status is reinstated, which it may be, what this affair has done is that it has brought attention back to the deeply offensive and extraordinary comments that Navalny has made in the past. What this episode demonstrates yet again, to my mind, is the extraordinary dissonance in Western approaches to Russia and the degree to which Western governments and Western institutions simply do not understand that country very well, and to the point where they actually know or act as if they know less about the country than many people in the Western public. Navalny has been built up as this major opposition leader, which he is not, and he has also been built up as this liberal supporter of Western values when he is not that either. Many people in the West know that. Amnesty and Western governments and Western institutions either apparently don't know it or pretend they don't. Inevitably, at a time like this, when we've seen movements in the United States and in other Western countries which make such a strong issue of racism and xenophobia and how unacceptable that is and how bad that is when directed to people of color, one would have thought that Navalny was someone that Western governments and Western institutions would steer clear of. Nonetheless, they went ahead and pushed support for him and are still doing so, provoking their reaction from their own public, which has now been educated to react against these kind of extraordinary comments in the way that has just happened. But in another sense, what this affair shows is that the Navalny affair continues to be a sequence of very strange and very baffling decisions, none of which make in themselves a great deal of sense. Let's start with the first, Vladimir Putin's very odd decision, given the allegations that were already swirling around Navalny and the cause of his illness, to allow him to be sent to Germany. Nobody has explained why Putin made that decision and what he thought would happen when Navalny did go to Germany. But of course, by making that decision, Putin undoubtedly sowed the storm which we have seen rage over the last few weeks. I cannot help but think that within Russia itself, within the Russian political leadership, there will have been criticisms of Putin in connection with this, and that this may be one of the reasons why Putin is taking such a strong position about Navalny now. Then there were these extraordinary contradictory decisions on the part of the German government, first saying that they would release the data to the Russians, which proved that Navalny had been poisoned by a nerve agent of the Novichok family, and then turning round and saying that they weren't going to do that after all. Again, it's very difficult to understand why Western governments, and the German government specifically, didn't realise what the impact of these contradictory decisions on Russia, on the Russian government, and on Russian public opinion would be. They've done Navalny himself no good at all, and they have certainly weakened his support within Russia itself. Then there was the extremely strange decision on the eve of Navalny's decision to return to Russia to publish this extraordinary video claiming that Putin was the owner of this extraordinary palace-like structure on Russia's Black Sea coast. The problem with that video, as I've discussed in earlier programs, is that this story is not only untrue, but has already been debunked since 10 years ago, including by the Financial Times, and that it would be extraordinarily easy for the Russian authorities, once again, to prove that it was untrue. And that, of course, is what they did, and Navalny's reputation in Russia has suffered a further hit in consequence. And then lastly, there's this very strange and unexplained decision by Navalny himself to return to Russia, even though the Russian authorities had already made it clear that she should expect imprisonment for breaching parole if he did in fact choose to Russia when he did. This is perhaps the strangest decision of all, and it does beg many questions to which I frankly admit I have no answer. Perhaps Navalny thought that by returning to Russia, he would become the focus of opposition as Aung San Suu Kyi was when she chose to return to Burma, Myanmar, all those years ago, leaving her family in Britain, even though she knew that on her return, she would be placed by the military authorities under house arrest. Well, that's possible, but all I will say about that is that if so, Navalny greatly overestimated his support in Russia itself. I've also heard, by the way, a further spin on that theory, which is that Navalny perhaps expected that hundreds of thousands or even millions of people would rise up in his support if any action were taken against him when he returned to Russia, and this would somehow galvanize opposition in Russia and would bring down the regime. There's even been comparisons made between the return to Russia of Lenin via Germany in 1917 and Navalny's return to Russia via Germany this time. If so, then all I can say about that is that Lenin, who at least did understand revolutionary politics, would have told Navalny, "You are a fool. What you should do is bide your time, as I did, wait for the point to come when returning might actually work to your advantage, and stay abroad and organize from there." But perhaps Navalny overestimated himself, and perhaps he didn't understand politics or Russian history very well. I don't know. But anyway, that was a very bizarre decision and a very strange one, and there's no real explanation for it. And now, of course, we have this final extraordinary decision by Amnesty, first to grant Navalny prisoner of conscience status, and now to withdraw it. This affair has been a strange set of missteps in which every party involved in it, the Russian government, the Western governments, Navalny himself, Amnesty now also, have all engaged. I wonder for how much longer this will go on. I suspect not very much more. But until then, who knows, perhaps some more bizarre and unexpected things will happen. Thank you for joining me for this program. Please check me out on both on this channel and on our other channels, the ones that I do with Alex Christoforou at the Duran, and also please check out Alex's own channel. You'll find links under this video. Please also look us up on our other platforms, BitChute, Library, Odyssey, Rumble, and all those. Please also support us through Patreon, PayPal, Subscribestar, and also via Bitcoin. And last but not least, please check out our amazing shop. See all the amazing things you will find there. Remember, you support us by buying things from the shop, and at the same time, you'll be thrilled to own the wonderful things you find in the shop. And please also come to my next program and have a wonderful day.